What makes a person invisible? Is it their clothes, their age, or is it something we choose not to see? Today, I want to share a story that happened in a small coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. A story about a man who disappeared from his family's life. Not because he stopped loving them, but because he loved them too much. This is a story about pride, sacrifice, and the moment one small detail changed everything. Stay with me, because by the end, you might see the world a little differently. It was a Tuesday morning at Corner Grounds Café, the kind of place where regulars know each other by name and the coffee comes with a smile. The autumn sun filtered through the windows, casting warm light on wooden tables filled with laptops, newspapers, and conversations. It was 9:47 a.m., and the morning rush was just beginning to ease. Then the door opened. An elderly man stepped inside. His name was Henry, though no one in that cafe knew it. He was 82 years old, with silver hair that needed a trim and deep lines etched across his face like a map of a long life. His jacket was clean but worn at the elbows. His shoes had been resoled more than once. He moved slowly, with the careful steps of someone whose knees had carried him through 8 decades. Henry stood just inside the doorway for a moment, as if gathering courage. "Great. This is gonna take forever." The comment wasn't meant for Henry to hear, but he heard it anyway. He always did. Henry had learned, over the past 3 years of living alone, that people often spoke as if he weren't there, as if age had rendered him not just slow, but invisible. He approached the counter.
What can I get you?
Just a small coffee, please. Black, and maybe a muffin if it's not too much trouble.
That'll be $6.50.
Henry's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. Not from illness, but from something deeper. Something anyone who's ever felt unwanted would recognize. He pulled out a small leather wallet, worn smooth from decades of use, and carefully counted out $7 bills. She placed 2 quarters on the counter without meeting his eyes, then turned away to prepare the order. Henry picked up the coins slowly, each movement deliberate, and stepped aside to wait. Henry heard them. He always heard them, but he said nothing. What was there to say? That he paid in cash because he'd closed his bank account to avoid overdraft fees? That he came to this cafe because it was the only warm place he could afford to sit for an hour without being asked to leave? That he wasn't slow out of inconsideration, but because his body simply didn't move the way it used to? He collected his coffee and muffin and turned to find a seat. Henry chose a small table in the back corner, away from the morning crowd. He set down his coffee carefully, unwrapped his muffin, and took a small bite. It was blueberry, his late wife Martha's favorite. The memory arrived unbidden, as memories often did these days, sharp and bittersweet. Martha had passed away 4 years ago. 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days to be exact. He still counted. As Henry sat there, sipping his coffee, he did what he always did. He watched. He watched young mothers juggling toddlers and coffee cups. He watched business people tapping urgently on laptops. He watched a young couple holding hands across a table, lost in each other's eyes the way he and Martha once were.
61 years we had. 61 good years.
But Henry wasn't just a widower sitting alone in a cafe. He was a father, a grandfather, a veteran who'd served in Vietnam. A man who'd worked 43 years as a machinist at the same factory, never missing a day he didn't have to. A man who'd taught his son to ride a bike, to tie a tie, to treat people with dignity. And 3 years ago, he'd walked away from all of it. Not because he wanted to, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. You see, after Martha died, Henry discovered something that terrified him more than enemy fire ever had. He was getting sick. The doctors called it chronic heart failure. They used words like progressive and management and quality of life. They talked about medications he couldn't pronounce and medical equipment he couldn't afford. His son David had a good job, a beautiful wife named Margaret, 2 kids heading to college. Henry had watched them build their lives with pride, and he refused to become the burden that would tear it all down. So one morning, Henry wrote a letter. He told David he needed to find himself, that he was going to travel, that he'd be in touch. He lied because he loved them. Then he cashed out his small pension, found a studio apartment in a different part of town, and disappeared into the kind of invisibility that happens to the elderly every day in America. 3 years, 2 months, 18 days. He counted those two. Across the café, a woman in her early 60s sat at a window table with her own coffee, untouched and growing cold. Her name was Margaret. She came here every Tuesday morning, to this same café, to this same table. It was a ritual she'd started 3 years ago, not long after her father-in-law vanished without explanation. This was the last place anyone had reported seeing Henry. Margaret wasn't naive. She knew Henry hadn't gone traveling. She knew something was wrong. But David, her husband, had believed the letter. "Dad needs space," he'd said. "We have to respect that." And when months turned into years without contact, David had grown angry, then distant, then resigned. But Margaret never stopped looking. Margaret quietly, to herself. And on this particular Tuesday, as Margaret sat staring out the window, something caught her eye. Not out the window, but reflected in it. An elderly man sitting alone in the back corner. She turned. The man was thin, older than she remembered, wearing clothes she didn't recognize. But there was something about the way he held his coffee cup, something about the slope of his shoulders. And then she saw it. On his left wrist, partially hidden by his sleeve, was a watch. Not just any watch, a Bulova Accutron with a distinctive dented silver band. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. That watch had been David's 10th birthday present to his father, 47 years ago. David had saved up his allowance for 6 months to buy it. When Henry opened it, he'd cried. He'd worn it every day since, refusing to replace it even when the band got dented, even when newer watches came along. "This watch means you'll always have my time, Dad," 10-year-old David had said. Margaret stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several customers looked her way. She didn't notice. Her eyes were locked on the man in the corner, her heart pounding. She crossed the café slowly, each step feeling like walking through water. What if she was wrong? What if it was just someone with a similar watch? But as she got closer, there was no doubt. It was Henry, her father-in-law, the man who'd taught her to make his famous Sunday pot roast, the man who'd held her hand in the hospital when she miscarried their first pregnancy, the man who'd walked her down the aisle when her own father couldn't be there, the man who'd vanished without goodbye. The old man looked up. For a moment his face was blank, polite confusion. Then recognition dawned, followed immediately by panic. His coffee cup rattled against the saucer.
Margaret. No, you shouldn't.
She sank into the chair across from him, uninvited but unable to stand. Tears were already streaming down her face. Henry's hands were trembling violently now, and it had nothing to do with age.
You need to go. Please. You can't. David can't know I'm here.
And then Henry did something Margaret had never seen in 28 years of knowing him. He broke. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks, dripping onto the table.
I'm sick, Margaret. My heart. I couldn't let you all spend your savings, your kids' college funds, keeping me alive a few more years. David worked so hard to build a life. I wasn't going to be the reason it all fell apart.
The cafe noise faded into background static. Margaret reached across the table and took Henry's trembling hands in hers. For the next 20 minutes, sitting in that corner table while the world bustled around them, Henry told Margaret everything. About the diagnosis he'd received 2 weeks after Martha's funeral. About the medications he couldn't afford. About the VA benefits he was too proud to apply for because he wasn't wounded in combat. just sick in old age. He told her about his studio apartment with the broken heater, about the soup kitchen, where he volunteered Tuesday and Thursday nights in exchange for a hot meal, about the part-time job he'd taken at age 79, stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store, until his heart couldn't handle it anymore, about the watch he refused to sell even though a pawn shop had offered him $500, because it was the last piece of his son he had left.
Every time I look at it, I remember that little boy saving his allowance. Remember him saying I'd always have his time. How could I ask him for more time when it was going to cost him everything?
Margaret listened to it all, her heart breaking with each revelation. And when Henry finished, exhausted and empty, she asked him one question. Henry's face crumpled.
No. No, I never wanted. David was perfect. He is perfect.
Henry shook his head, but there was less conviction in it now.
I'm too far gone, Margaret. The doctor said.
She pulled out her phone, but Henry reached across and gently stopped her.
Wait, please. I need to know. Is David okay? Really okay?
Henry closed his eyes.
I thought I was doing the right thing.
As Margaret and Henry sat together, something else was happening in that café. The barista, whose name was Emma, had been watching from behind the counter. She'd seen Margaret's tears, seen the way she held the old man's hands, seen the transformation on his face from resignation to hope.
Oh, God. What did I do?
Emma was 26 years old. She worked 2 jobs to pay off student loans. She was tired, overworked, and had defaulted to treating every customer like an obstacle between her and the end of her shift. But in that moment, watching a reunion unfold before her eyes, something shifted. She quietly made a fresh coffee, grabbed the last cinnamon roll from the pastry case, and brought them both to Henry's table.
On the house. I'm sorry I was rude earlier.
You don't have to.
I do. My grandfather? He's in a nursing home. I haven't visited him in 8 months because I'm too busy, too tired. But watching you two, I'm going to see him this weekend. Thank you for reminding me.
Emma walked away before Henry could respond, but the gesture rippled outward. The cafe manager, who'd been watching everything, came over to Margaret's table.
I don't know your story, but I know humanity when I see it. You folks take all the time you need. And sir, you're welcome here anytime. No purchase required.
This is the part of the story I want you to remember. Because kindness, real kindness, isn't always dramatic. It's a free coffee. It's a nod of respect. It's deciding to see the person behind the weathered face. And it spreads, quietly, person to person, like light through water. Margaret pulled out her phone again, and this time, Henry didn't stop her. His hands were still shaking, but now it was anticipation mixed with fear.
What if he won't talk to me?
She dialed. The phone rang once, twice.
Hey, hon, what's up? I'm in the middle of a meeting. What? Why? Is everything okay? Margaret, you're scaring me. What's going on?
There was a pause.
I'll be there in 15 minutes.
Those 15 minutes felt like hours. Henry and Margaret sat in silence, their coffees forgotten. Henry kept touching the watch on his wrist, as if drawing strength from it. Margaret kept squeezing his hand, afraid that if she let go, he might vanish again.
What if he hates me? I left him, Margaret. Just like my father left me when I was 12. I swore I'd never do that. And I did it anyway.
Margaret's eyes widened.
Said he was going out for cigarettes. Never came back. I was 12. My mother raised 4 kids on a waitress salary. I watched her work herself to death by 53. I swore I'd never abandon my family. And then,
At minute 14, the cafe door opened. David walked in, still wearing his suit from work, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He scanned the cafe looking for Margaret, and then he saw the man sitting across from her. Time stopped. David stood frozen, his briefcase slipping from his hand and hitting the floor with a thud that made several customers jump. His face went through a dozen emotions in 3 seconds: confusion, recognition, disbelief, anger, pain, joy, all tumbling over each other.
Dad?
David. Son, I'm so sorry.
David crossed the cafe in 4 long strides. For a moment, everyone watching thought he might yell. Instead, he did something that made half the cafe tear up. He wrapped his arms around his elderly father and held on like a drowning man grabbing a life raft.
I thought you were dead. I thought I'd done something wrong. I thought you didn't love me anymore.
No, no, no. I loved you too much. I loved you so much I thought leaving was protecting you. I was wrong. I was so wrong.
They stood like that, father and son, in the middle of a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. While strangers wiped their eyes and the barista named Emma sobbed behind the counter, Margaret stood to the side, tears streaming down her face, and she caught Emma's eye across the cafe. They nodded at each other. 2 women, 2 generations, both understanding that they'd just witnessed something sacred. 2 hours later, the 3 of them were still at that table. The cafe had emptied and refilled with the lunch crowd. The manager had brought them sandwiches, waving away payment. Henry had told David everything, just as he'd told Margaret, and David had listened, his hand never leaving his father's shoulder.
Dad, I have good insurance. Better than I did 3 years ago. We'll get you to a cardiologist. The VA benefits you refused to apply for? We're applying tomorrow. And you're not going back to that apartment.
David, I can't just move in with you.
The hell you can't. You think I'm giving you a choice this time?
Henry started to argue, then saw the look on his son's face. It was the same stubborn expression Henry used to see in the mirror 30 years ago.
You get that from your mother.
I get everything good from you two.
They gathered Henry's few belongings from his studio apartment that afternoon. It took less than an hour. 3 years of life fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. The sparse room told its own story, a hot plate instead of a stove, blankets piled on a bed to compensate for broken heating, a small pile of medical bills on the counter, methodically organized by due date. David stood in the doorway, taking it all in, and his face hardened with resolve.
Never again, Dad. You hear me? Never again.
They drove to David and Margaret's home in the suburbs, the house Henry had visited every Sunday for family dinners, the house he'd helped David paint when they first bought it, the house he thought he'd never see again. When they pulled into the driveway, David's 2 kids, Emily and Jake, were waiting on the porch, both in their 20s now. They'd been 12 and 14 when Henry disappeared, Emily running down the steps. The reunion started all over again. More tears, more hugs, more apologies and forgiveness flowing in both directions. That evening, as Henry sat at the dinner table he thought he'd never see again, eating Margaret's pot roast and listening to his grandchildren talk about college and jobs and their lives, something inside him finally relaxed. The knot of fear and pride and stubborn self-sacrifice that had lived in his chest for 3 years slowly began to untangle.
I was wrong to leave.
Yes, you were.
I thought I was saving you.
You were robbing us. All of us. We needed you, Dad. Not your money. Not your independence. Just you.
In the weeks that followed, Henry's story became known around that cafe. Emma, the barista, told the manager about what she'd witnessed. The manager shared it with the staff. And slowly, something shifted in Corner Grounds Cafe. Staff started learning regulars' names, started asking how their days were going. started noticing the elderly customers who came in alone and making sure they felt seen. One server started a suspended coffee program, where customers could pay for an extra coffee that someone in need could claim for free. Within a month, the cafe was serving 20 suspended coffees a week. Emma started visiting her grandfather every Sunday. She brought him coffee from corner grounds, and they'd sit together, mostly in silence, but together. And Margaret continued her Tuesday morning ritual at corner grounds, except now she brought Henry with her. 6 months after that morning, David and Margaret threw a small party. It was Henry's 83rd birthday. The cafe manager was there. Emma was there. Even a few of the customers who'd witnessed the reunion came, bringing cards and well wishes. Henry stood in his son's living room, surrounded by family and strangers who'd become friends, and he made a toast.
I spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to become invisible because I thought that's what love looked like. But I learned something. Being seen, being known, being loved, even when you're broken, that's the greatest gift we can give each other. Thank you all for seeing me, for refusing to let me disappear.
There wasn't a dry eye in the room. 1 year after that morning in the cafe, Henry was still here. His heart condition was managed with medication that David's insurance covered. He'd finally applied for his VA benefits, with David's help, and received back payments that covered most of his accumulated medical debt. But more importantly, he was home. He lived in David and Margaret's renovated basement, which they'd converted into a full apartment with his input. He had weekly dinners with the family. He attended Emily's graduate school graduation and helped Jake move into his first apartment. And every Tuesday morning, he and Margaret went to Corner Grounds Café. On this particular Tuesday, a year and a week after Margaret had first seen the watch, they sat at their usual table. Emma brought their coffees without asking, smiled, and squeezed Henry's shoulder as she passed.
You saved my life, you know. That morning, David called this morning, asked if I wanted to go fishing this weekend. Margaret, do you think Martha would forgive me for giving up like that? What's that?
This story is about Henry, but it's also about all of us. About the elderly neighbor we walk past without noticing. About the slow customer in line we sigh at impatiently. About the parent or grandparent we're too busy to call. According to recent studies, over 25% of seniors in North America report feeling lonely or isolated. Many of them, like Henry, are making invisible sacrifices, living with invisible struggles, carrying invisible pride that prevents them from asking for help. We pass them in coffee shops, in grocery stores, in hospital waiting rooms. We see them without seeing them. But here's what Henry's story teaches us. Every person you pass has a story. Every elderly face you glance at and dismiss was once someone's entire world. They were someone's hero, someone's first love, someone's reason to wake up every morning. And they still are. They're still worthy of dignity, of respect, of being seen. The next time you see someone like Henry, someone old and slow and seemingly in your way, I want you to do something. Look at them. Really look at them. See the person behind the weathered face. Maybe smile. Maybe say good morning. Maybe hold the door a second longer. Because that simple act of acknowledgement, that small gesture of seeing someone, might be the thing that reminds them they haven't disappeared, that they still matter, that they're still here. And maybe, just maybe, it'll remind you of something too, that one day, if we're lucky, we'll be that person others walk past. And we'll hope that someone, anyone, takes a moment to see us too. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, have you ever reconnected with someone you'd lost touch with? What small act of kindness has someone shown you when you needed it most? Or simply share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing. Every week, I share true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about the quiet moments that change lives, about the compassion that still exists in this world, if we take the time to look for it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you for choosing to see the Henrys in your life. Until next week, be kind, be present, and remember, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Choose to see them anyway.